My people are praying for a man who can drive their team to victory.
I was the one who always sought information. I wanted to understand more about the family that I was living in, and I think much of that had to do with the fact that I was adopted. I was told that I was a gift from God, and that I actually chose them, they didn't choose me, and that this special gift that they wanted so badly had arrived, and that they were so thrilled to have me, and so I felt very loved and very wanted. My father's commitment to his family, I think, was based on the difficulties he had growing up in a broken family.
He had a loving mother and a loving father. Unfortunately, they broke up when he was quite young, and he didn't see his dad for many years thereafter.
I think there is a part of the child in him that never recovered from not having his father there, and even though he respected deeply his stepfather, there was very little warmth, there was no nurturing, no tenderness, and I think that was very difficult for my father, and it wasn't always happy for him.
Many years later, he was I think it was in Detroit, where he believed his father lived. He was there with my mom on business, and he looked up my grandfather's name, Russell Carter, in the phone book, and found a name, called it at random, and it was his dad. And he said, "Dad, it's Chuck." And to his credit, my grandfather said, "Stay where you are, don't move, I'm coming over immediately." So this half a lifetime had transpired, and they had a reunion. After that, they had a wonderful relationship, and he still maintained a wonderful relationship with his mother as well. Kind of reached forward and tugged it a little bit, pulled it.
I turned around ready to really explode, and I realized that it was he, the same person who had been a star in this film. And I was quite dazzled.
Later on, he had the temerity to ask her out. It's amazing she ever talked to him again, but there must have been something that clicked there. It was definitely a lasting relationship. And there are not many people who have been married for more than 60 years in Hollywood. I think they were kindred spirits. They both loved the theater. They both loved acting. Mom was also an actress, acted and did films well into the 50s. Before she discovered photography. She enjoyed being behind the camera more, and she was quite a good cinematographer too. And I think they were both artists, in other words. I think they had a love of literature, of theater, of characters and great stories that brought them together.
I had heard that way back in school, Lydia was the up-and-comer. Lydia was the one that was to be flagged as the actress. She was the one that was going to go places. So I found myself with Lydia at some moment, and I said, "So Lydia, what happened? You had this enormous talent. Why didn't you pursue it?" And she said, "Oh, well, it I guess it just got away from me, I suppose." I always loved that. It was so graceful and gracious, and it was such an explanation of all that she took on.
My sense is, at this stage of my life, that the choices my mother made with her career were really the best choices she could have made. I remember both of my parents giving me examples. My father would go on an interview for a job, and he would walk away and say, "I've got it in the bag, no problem." My mother would go for an interview, and she'd walk away saying, "I didn't get it. There's no way I got it, no way." I don't know if acting would have been her bag. The choice she made to be behind the camera, to find this other creative outlet for her was a much better choice for her. He was in front of the camera, she was behind the camera. That kind of synergy was really important in their relationship. My mother was the glue in this family. She kept it all together. And I think as they grew up, because they met at 18 and married at 20, they really grew up together. And for almost 65 years, that's what they did together. And I've never seen anything like it.
He didn't think 10 Commandments had done it for him. So he did the role of the ranch foreman in The Big Country for William Wyler after doing 10 Commandments, and you would think he wouldn't do supporting roles. But he was very happy to support Greg Peck, who was wonderful in the picture. And it was interesting that it gave Wyler the insight to see what he had in him to play a major epic starring role like Ben-Hur.
Heston wasn't yet, Charlton Heston. He was close, but it wasn't as if you put him in a movie, it's automatic box office. It was a very expensive movie to make. MGM was struggling. They were losing money year over year, and they picked a rising young star. It was quite a risk.
In 1956, my father began to keep a journal. He kept it religiously every day of his working life for the better part of the next half century. He knew that what he was doing might be important for posterity, but more importantly, it was important for him to help him get it right. And I think I'd like to read some of that journal for you now from the Ben-Hur years. Tuesday, January 21st, 1958. I found Willie Wyler had finally approved me for the role of Ben-Hur. Ben Thau, a top MGM executive, was most gracious and warm, and I was filled with exultation, which flowed through the happy evening which Lydia and I spent with a bottle of champagne and happy thoughts of 8 months in Italy. God, what a thing. When Dad found out that he got the role, I wouldn't say it was a complete surprise because he knew he was up to it. He had the script, and he would very graciously loan the script to other actors like Chuck Connors, who might have been in contention. So he had no idea that it was a lock. And perhaps it wasn't.
It was a point at which he would either go on to stardom or perhaps not, perhaps find another way of life. And he didn't know which was the one.
Making a film like Ben-Hur was an enormous commitment, not only of energy, but of time and relocating your home base for months and months and months. Nowadays, 3 months might be a reasonable shoot, even a long shoot somewhere. But when we realized that we were going to spend 8 or 10 months in Italy, it was a life-changing event. We took the train from our little apartment in Park La Brea Towers here on 3rd Street in LA to New York, and then it was a big deal. We went down to the pier in New York City to the SS United States, I believe it was, and we boarded this fantastic black ship with huge smokestacks and literally thousands of people standing on the quay to say goodbye to everybody. It was a big deal in those days, apart from our adventure. But for the shy kid from Michigan
I don't really think he liked traveling. He wanted to be home. He wanted to be in his bed. He wanted to wake up in his house. He did it because it was part of the job. He loved the creative process. He loved working. But you know what he loved more? Coming home.
Travel for my mom was never a sacrifice. Mom loves to travel.
My mother is most happy traveling. She doesn't really want to be home. She wants to be on the road. And my father doesn't want to be on the road. He wants to be at home. But they made it work. There was a compromise in there.
Bring him a cool drink, and he would just try to unwind on his one day off on Sundays, and it was so hot most of the time, and he was working so hard, he was just exhausted, so he'd just sit in the fountain and kind of veg out for a while.
The house was quite romantic. It was glorious. And as Chuck said, it was a hell of a layout.
Star of David.
My father had been an assistant director on the silent Ben-Hur, one of many assistant directors. And I believe that on the first day of shooting, he called everyone together and introduced all the assistant directors and told them that he'd been an assistant director on the previous Ben-Hur. Look at these guys. Now, one of them is going to direct the next Ben-Hur.
Tuesday, May 20th, 1958. First day of principal photography on Ben-Hur. Well, the first day's behind me. It lifted off my chest like a weight that had been growing there imperceptibly, I suppose, since the day I knew most of this year would be spent Ben-Huring with William Wyler. In keeping with his methods, of course, we actually shot only a little today. Some remarkable tracking shots of the harnessing action and the shake and me going along the gallery from the driver's rooms. I would say in the basis of one day, William Wyler is no more awed by a $10 million plus production than he is by $3 million one. So far, so good.
It's true that when my father was on the set, you know, he was not only the boss, he was the chief honcho, he was God.
How many takes it would take me. Sometimes I get it first take. He said, but then you think, maybe I should have another go, and then it'd go another 15 after that. But he'd use the first one.
He wouldn't quit on a scene, he wouldn't quit on an actor, he wouldn't quit getting the script right, he wouldn't quit on a performance. And if he wasn't satisfied, he'd keep at it until he got what he liked, even if he couldn't articulate it. There was a famous story my dad used to tell where Willie kept saying, you know, Chuck, I can't tell you what to do. If I knew what it was I wanted, I would tell you. It would be easy. You just do it. But I can only say that you need to be better in this part or this scene. And in an odd way, that was the best piece of direction my dad ever got, because first of all, it worked. And second of all, it motivated him. As he said, he went home and licked his wounds and turned to his family to give him solace and kind of recharge his batteries a little bit. I'm sure it wounded him when Willie told him. This must have been about a third of the way through the picture, but that's the way Willie worked.
Well, I think my father very definitely had a method. People said that he was inarticulate, but he was not really inarticulate. He just wanted people to find the character for themselves, not be told, and then do something which would then seem artificial. So I think he pushed them very hard to understand the character themselves and find in themselves whatever it was he wanted. And you know, they often did.
Well, I think as an actor, you make every character a little bit about you. There may be aspects that are not like you, but I think you, without knowing it, you infuse yourself into certain roles. But I think in Ben-Hur, there was a lot of my father there. But I think he needed Willie Wyler to pull him out. I really do. I think he needed someone who was more experienced than he was.
Chuck didn't know what ego was. I mean, he loved to act. And Chuck would listen to a director. And I mean, if the director told him to do something, even though he had better ideas, he'd do it the director's way, period. And that, he learned that from, working with DeMille and with the Wyler and, those are guys in those days that you did it their way. You didn't direct over their shoulder and last more than an hour or two on the set.
But there was one day when he happened to mention in passing as they were getting in a taxi or something, he said, Chuck, you were good in the scene today. Dad said, what did you say? And Willie said, you were good in the scene we did today. I thought you were very good. And Chuck said, oh, gosh, thanks, Willie. because he'd never said anything to him like that. It's a day of work in his life, so he wouldn't tell anybody.
My father took his profession very seriously, and his conduct in professional situations was really more important to him than
Opportunity, of course, to go to some of the great nightlife and restaurants in Rome at the time. I remember very well going to Alfredo's restaurant and having fettuccine Alfredo made by Alfredo, for example. But none of this is very good for an actor's waistline. So Dad was just religiously watching his weight. He'd work out every day, as I say, and constantly writing down whether he'd gained or lost a pound. It was a big deal to him.
he knew that his physical strength was a part of his saleability. He knew that if he was going to get a part, he had to be healthy.
He said you can have the acting and the work, or you can have the nightlife and the partying, but it's hard to have both, and one's got to go, and I think we know what he chose. Close-up, the long scene of questioning Esther with 2 or 3 lenses, till my eyes literally got tired focusing on the same spot. The problem grows clearer in these delicate scenes. It's simply to play with enough conviction and belief in the early takes before Willie fences me in with so many instructions to that conviction that I can't reach it anymore. William Wyler is beyond question the toughest director I've ever worked for, and I still think the best.
Chuck knew, I think, everything he could know about film, and yet he was very much a director's actor. I mean, he knew the proper order of things and respected that, but he also respected what a collaboration it was to make a film.
He would sit in his chair on the set most of the day. He wouldn't hang out in his trailer. Many actors prefer to hide in their trailers all day, which is fine. That's what it's there for. But Dad said, look, they pay me to do this. I kind of do the acting part for free. It's the waiting that's boring, and that's what I get paid to do. And he would hang out. Many of his friends were stuntmen and horse wranglers and other actors and so on. He didn't really care who you were. He cared what sort of person you were. And I think that made him a personable kind of guy that crewmen would remember.
There was no sense that anybody had to call Chuck Sir. That wasn't, they may have begun that way because that would have perhaps been a habit back then, but it didn't last. And he loved the community of making the movie. And I made a movie with him called The Awakening. There was one scene where he had to reach through a hole in a rock, and he had to get himself all contorted in order to be seen by the camera. And he loved solving the problems. He loved doing the difficult stuff. He absolutely loved it.
The only pet peeve that I think he had was the late arrival of his leading ladies, perhaps not realizing the endless makeup and the insecurities of looking good. And that's the one thing that really upset him, just to hang around, because it wasn't professional. Again, the professional standard. You're being paid, I don't care who you are, you can do the job. Ava Gardner, Sophia Loren, whoever it happens to be. They didn't see it that way, of course. But so I think there was a little friction, probably, first couple hours on the set.
Dad was a good artist. He started out doing sketches from a very early period in his career, and he would bring a sketchbook to work the way one of us might bring a camera. And just in his idle moments, whether you were having lunch or waiting for a setup, he'd draw the lighting gaffer working with the lights. He'd draw the grips moving the dolly around. He'd draw stuntmen, and he would draw actors and glamorous people as well. And he told me that he felt an artist should have an art that you do for free, that you do just for fun, to satisfy your own creative ambitions. So that was kind of a release for him.
He really had a very extraordinary ability as an artist, and he was intrigued by the whole atmosphere of the set and how the actors were reacting to the various scenes. And I think he did wonderful work, but I'm prejudiced.
At one point, Mom and I went to Venice, leaving Dad on his own in the villa in Rome. Dad writes, Monday, September 8th, 1958. A long and laboriously exhausting day in which I came home almost too tired to be lonely, though the villa echoed emptily with the footsteps of my son and the shape of Lydia. Their voices from Venice sounded full and happy, though, and I was able to give them a good report on the day, at least. He looked on the family as a source of solace and kind of regeneration for his soul, for his body, for his mind, when he wasn't filming. When he was shooting, it was all-consuming, exhausting work. It was terribly taxing. It was the last thing they shot. At this point, he was so tired and so drained mentally and physically, he somehow lost it, to use his phrase. And it was a marvelous moment. It shows in the film, and it's real. Something happened seeing that set and the depiction of the crucifixion that got to my dad in his heart in a way that no other scene in the entire film did. Wednesday, January 7th, 1959. Last day of principal photography, Ben-Hur. The last day finally came. We were very homesick, I'm sure. I think Mom less so. Mom said she could have spent another 10 months. I don't see why Dad wants to get home so soon. And Tally Weiler said, well, I think your 10 months was spent in the glories of Rome, and your husband's 10 months and Willie's 10 months were spent in the galleys in the Roman arena. It's a little different. But when we finally got home, we all shed a tear, I think, when we saw the Statue of Liberty. It meant a lot to get home. Dad loved America and loved being home, so I think for him he was ready to come home by then. Wednesday, March 4th, 1959, Los Angeles. Thanks to an early rising and a fantastic improvement in the roads in California since we last drove through, we got home in wonderful time.
think what complicated things was that he wasn't here when the house was being built. He had to rely really on his father and constant communication back and forth from Rome to Los Angeles in all of the details.
His father came to practically live on the site to supervise construction while we were gone. It wasn't quite finished, but it was close to it. I remember we had wonderful picnics there where we'd bring our friends and we'd have hot dog roast on the fire and we'd fly kites in the wind, and it was marvelous. Of course, eventually we did get it finished, and he did a couple other pictures after that, was able to pay for it, so. The pool was wonderful. It was out kind of on a ridge, and we had this amazing view around it. But I think it was more the tennis court that was the center of our life. Dad loved tennis. That was his sport. So his outdoor activities, other than taking me shooting and fishing occasionally, revolved around the tennis court as much as anything. It is genuinely a work of art, and surely worth all the painful effort and months. I was very proud and very happy. This one should do it. This one should surely do it.
I kept forcing myself to step back and look at it and see how it would work out with a real audience. And I hoped it would mean to people what
He took the Oscar seriously. He had a lot of respect for the Academy. As he often said, it's a jury of your peers. Literally, the actors nominate the actors, the directors nominate the directors, and so on. Then everybody votes for the nominees. So I think it meant a lot to him when he got the nomination, and clearly he wanted to get it. But he really wasn't sure if he had a chance or not. Jimmy Stewart was nominated, and he ran into Jimmy Stewart on the red carpet, and they had to stand and do photographs and shake hands. And he said Jimmy Stewart turned to him and said the most moving thing after the press had disappeared. He said, "Chuck, I hope you win it. I mean that, I really do." And he said that really, really shook him. He thought, wow, this is a guy that, to my dad, who really was a star. And he said he remembers kind of drifting off until Susan Hayward began to read the nominations.
It's my honor to present the Academy Award to the artist voted by his fellows in the industry as having given the best performance by an actor. The nominees are Lawrence Harvey, Room at the Top, Charlton Heston, Ben-Hur, Jack Lemmon, Some Like It Hot, Paul Muni, The Last Angry Man, and James Stewart, Anatomy of...
A moment, indeed a night, I will never forget. Backstage, posing beside Willie Wyler with his third Oscar, I said, "Willie, I guess this is old hat to you." "Chuck," he said, "it never gets old hat."
But he also felt that the success of Ben-Hur killed his reputation with the French Cahiers du Cinéma and the sort of film intelligentsia, those sorts of critics. After Ben-Hur, he just couldn't do anything right because, you know, they didn't see Ben-Hur as, I think, the quality film that it is.
After the Oscar evening, when they'd been out celebrating all night, Dad came home at just about dawn. And I remember I woke up, or I was woken up at the time, to give him a big hug. And my first view of him was sitting on the front steps of the house that Hur built, as my dad called the house that he couldn't even pay for when he started to build it, reading the front page of the LA Times with his picture and name on it, with the Oscar sitting beside him on the steps gleaming in the dawn light. And if you think that didn't mean a lot to him, you're sorely mistaken.
Ben-Hur proved that he could do it. He could really do it, and he could handle all those myriad of different aspects of a person.
He got a lot of offers for biblical films after this, but I think he felt that he had done two of the best biblical films that he was going to do. He did 10 Commandments and he did Ben-Hur. So he wasn't that keen on getting typecast in that area, although he loved the genre and obviously he was good at it. But I think at the same time, he had other things he wanted to do. He took the stage as seriously as he took film. He really wanted to do plays. He did then go on and try to do a play about every 2 or 3 years. So I think the films that he took after, like El Cid, I think was a good compromise. Clearly an epic, clearly a big, expensive, important film, but not a biblical film, and a very different kind of guy. I think in some of his other films, he tried to branch out. Obviously, in the late 60s, when he did things like Planet of the Apes and films that were science fiction, like Soylent Green, and westerns like Will Penny, he showed that he truly was a versatile actor.
I went to the premiere of Planet of the Apes with my father. My mother was sick, and we sat through the entire movie, and at the end of the movie, I turned to my father and I said, "Dad, you're really handsome." It was at that moment that I realized that he was sort of this sex symbol of a sort. It never dawned on me, but in Planet of the Apes, he wears a loincloth through most of the movie. And I never really thought he was my dad. He was not a sex symbol. He wasn't a god. He was Dad. And that was a revelation for me. But he was always an actor / dad, or a dad / actor. It was all part of the package.
Chuck was a big commodity. He could get movies made. If you had Chuck Heston in your knapsack, then you were pretty, you were fortunate. And so what he chose to do was very significant. And to choose from all over the board the way that he did, that says that he's very curious and he's very sort of unafraid and unimpressed by his own celebrity. He's not defending anything.
If he wanted to do something, he did it. And he walked Earthquake 1 minute, Anthony and Cleopatra, which he's directing in Spain, the next.
Fulvia, your wife, first came into the field. Against my brother Lucius. But then they joined their forces against Caesar, who soon from Italy drove them.
He had performed in Antony and Cleopatra in a smaller role when he was on Broadway in the early days. And he always wanted to play Antony on film. So that was a dream come true. He got to perform his favorite role in an independent film which he basically controlled. And at the same time, like a kid in a candy store, he was able to ride horses and swing swords and lead armies and have ships and things on fire and beautiful women in fantastic settings. And it was just, a marvelous sort of epic experience for him. And it was his film.
The bulk of the world played as I pleased, making and marring fortunes. You didn't know how much you were my conqueror, and that my sword, made weak by my affection, would obey it in all cause.
I have never seen a man work so hard with such dedication on any project ever. He amazed me. The energy, the passion, The courteousness, he was so kind and considerate. How he could find the time to do that when he was the director and the star and the producer, because yes, between those, he went off to production meetings as well. I mean, the energy was just amazing.
So I think Ben-Hur does come full circle with Antony for him, because here's a man who began with Shakespeare, turned to biblical epics, was able to do Ben-Hur, wins the Academy Award, and now he was able to... I think he viewed success as something which comes with responsibilities, and he knew that his first responsibility was to the audience.
That was one of his biggest things, is he was always, even younger, I could always tell if we were walking out just in, going to go grocery shopping, or if he was picking me up from school and somebody recognized him and wanted to talk to him, he would stop and, be like, oh, thank you so much, like, I really appreciate it. And he was always really cordial with his fans and really polite and never snapped or anything like that, even though I'm sure he must have gotten assaulted at times just by all the attention or whatever, because he was a recognizable figure. But so that was a big deal for him. I think it was something he used to say was, they pay me to act, but half of that is going towards, my being accessible.
Over the period of his life, he stood up for things that he believed in. I don't think people even remember that he was the first, at the position of the business he was in, led the first contingent to march with Dr. King. And people don't realize that wasn't exactly politically correct, and it was a risk. And I'm sure the advice was, why do that? You're at the pinnacle of business. What do you have to gain for it? I think he just felt it was the right thing to do, and throughout his life, he did that, whether it was popular or not.
The thing that I love about Chuck Heston is that he believed what he believed. He wasn't afraid of saying so. And there aren't very many people that are afraid to stand in their own beliefs.
The one thing I remember also my father always saying to me, Holly, sometimes you have to take a stance. Sometimes you have to stand behind things that are not very popular, regardless of whether you're going to be liked or not. It's important that whatever you decide to stand behind, that you stand behind it completely.
It wasn't a career move to become president of the Screen Actors Guild. I'm sure the professionals in the business who would give him advice said, you're the top dog at all these studios. Why do you want to risk angering studio executives? What can you get out of it? I know how he felt about that. I believe that too, that the tradition in the union has always been those who didn't need it anymore needed to stand up for those who did. That was the same later on with the National Rifle Association. I'm sure he got a lot of advice that, Chuck, you shouldn't do that. And Chuck would always quote the Bill of Rights, which he was an absolutist about, and they probably said, couldn't you pick one of the amendments to the Constitution that's a little more fashionable? And I know what he said. He said, well, right now the Second Amendment's the most in danger.
And his convictions, once he had them, you couldn't shift them. I mean, he was a Republican from the day I met him to the day he passed away. I mean, but he didn't jam it down your throat. I'd never heard him, as so many of political persuasion do, in a mixed group of people spouting, never did it. Just didn't do it.
But in all those cases, he made people listen.
By election.
He was so professional.